Zero blinked, as if surprised by the question. For a moment, she said nothing, simply studying him. Her hand rested lightly on her hip, and she tilted her head, considering the human's words. It wasn't often that someone asked her what she wanted. Usually, they were too busy trying to survive or make sense of the alien presence in front of them. "I want nothing from you," she replied after a long pause, her voice sharp but not unkind. "I am not here to conquer or destroy. I am here to understand. To see if you are different. But so far, you seem like all the others." Mark frowned, confused by her answer. "The others? What do you mean?" Zira took a step back, her glowing eyes scanning the horizon. "The others who have tried to challenge me, to show their strength. Most think they can defeat me, or at least show me their power. But they fail, and I grow bored of their weakness. But you're different." Her eyes flicked back to him, her smirk returning. "You speak with conviction, but do you have the strength to back it up?" Mark could feel the challenge in her words, but something inside him refused to back down. He didn't know what this was about, but he wasn't going to let it go unanswered. "I don't know what you're looking for, Zira," he said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "But I'm not here to prove something to you. I'm here because something tells me that we're not so different after all. Maybe you've fought many battles, maybe you've conquered worlds, but maybe, just maybe, you're looking for something else." Zira's expression shifted, a flicker of something unfamiliar crossing her face. For a moment, her confident demeanor faltered. She hadn't expected that. In her long life, she had faced countless beings, yet no one had ever spoken to her like this. No one had ever dared to look beyond the surface, to challenge her not just with power, but with understanding. Her gaze softened slightly, and she regarded Mark in a new light. Maybe this human wasn't as insignificant as she had first thought. Maybe there was more to him than his size, more to his heart than his words could say. "Perhaps you're right," Zara said slowly, her voice quieter now, almost contemplative. "Perhaps I have been too quick to judge. But that doesn't mean I'll make it easy for you." Mark smiled faintly, his heart still racing. The encounter wasn't over, but it had changed. The first step had been taken, and that he knew was just the beginning. The sky above seemed endless, stretching far beyond the horizon in all directions. Stars twinkled like little specks of dust scattered across the dark expanse of space, casting their faint glow over the land below. The night air was cool, almost crisp, but it did nothing to dull the tension that hung between Mark and Zara. Mark stood tall, though he was aware of the vast difference in their size. Zara, the alien before him, was still towering, her presence almost overwhelming. But something in his chest, this strange, persistent feeling that had been growing since the moment he first locked eyes with her, refused to let him back down. He had to prove to her, to himself, that he was more than just some weak, fragile human. Zira studied him carefully, her bright, glowing eyes scanning him from head to toe. She was still intrigued by him. There was something about Mark, something that had caught her attention in a way that she hadn't felt before. Most humans she had met were either afraid or eager to please. But Mark? He didn't beg for mercy, and he didn't try to fight her directly either. He was different. After a long pause, she spoke, her voice smooth and commanding. "I see you don't fear me. That's unexpected." Mark didn't flinch at her words. He had expected her to try and intimidate him, to use her towering figure and her alien powers to scare him into submission. But that wasn't what was happening here. This was a different kind of challenge. Zira wasn't just physically powerful, there was a sharpness in her mind. A cleverness that made her seem like she was always a few steps ahead. And it was clear now that this encounter wasn't about brute strength. It was about something deeper. I'm not afraid of you, Mark said, his voice steady. But I'm not here to fight you, either. Zira's lips curved into a small smile, almost like she was amused by his response. She crossed her arms over her chest, a gesture that emphasized her confidence and strength. So you think you can just stand there and talk your way out of this? Do you really believe words alone will make you worthy? Mark knew this was the moment he had to prove something. He wasn't the strongest person alive. He didn't have special powers like Zira. He wasn't capable of feats of strength or combat skills like some of the warriors she had undoubtedly faced in the past. But he had something else.
The general watched the fight unfold with a calculating gaze. "You're strong," he said, his voice colder now. "But it won't be enough. You cannot fight the truth. You cannot stop the revolution. You've already lost." You shot back. "We're going to end this here." With that, you charge, your weapon crackling with energy as you slammed into the front lines. You fought with everything you had, pushing back against the soldiers, forcing them to retreat. But the general wasn't finished yet. He stepped forward, his own weapon drawn, his presence looming over you like a storm cloud. "You're brave," the general said, his voice almost respectful now. "But bravery won't save you." Before you could react, he struck, his weapon flashing with deadly precision. You blocked his blow just in time, feeling the shockwave from the impact rattle your bones. The force of his strike sent you stumbling back, but you quickly regained your footing. The fight wasn't over yet. "You may have the power," you said, your voice steady despite the pain. "But you've lost your humanity. And that's what will make you fall." The general didn't respond. Instead, he charged again, faster this time, his movement so quick that it felt like he was everywhere at once. You barely managed to dodge one of his strikes, the edge of his weapon grazing your shoulder. Nira intervened, using her time manipulation to slow him down just enough for you to strike back. In that split second, you lunged forward, your weapon meeting his in a clash of energy. Sparks flew, lighting up the dark room as the two of you fought for control. "You don't understand," the general growled, sweat dripping down his face. "The galaxy is sick. It needs to be cleansed. Only the strong can survive. Only the strong deserve to rule." "You're wrong," you replied, pushing against his strength. "The strong protect. They don't destroy." In that moment, you saw the opening you needed. With one final surge of strength, you drove your weapon forward, disarming the general and sending him crashing to the ground. He lay there for a moment, panting and defeated, the arrogance that had once filled his gaze now replaced with disbelief. "This isn't over," he whispered, but there was no conviction in his words. The rebellion's forces faltered, their morale shattered by the fall of their leader. With the general down, you knew the tide had turned. The rebellion had been thrown into chaos, and victory was within reach. But as you stood there, victorious yet exhausted, you knew the fight wasn't truly over. The rebellion was only one part of the galaxy's struggle, and the legacy of Arcus still hung heavy on your shoulders. "We've won this battle," Nira said, breathing heavily but smiling. "But the war is far from over." You felt a twinge of guilt, as though you were about to drag these powerful beings into a dangerous world that they didn't deserve. But before you could speak, Ilara, the quietest of the three, finally broke her silence. She had been standing apart from the others, her violet eyes fixed on you, with an intensity that made you feel as though she could see right through you. "Time and healing may be useful," she said coolly, "but in the end, it is strategy that will win this war. I am a tactician. My ability to manipulate gravity gives me control over the battlefield. I can make objects, people, even entire landscapes move as I wish, creating an advantage in combat. But be warned, this power is not for the faint of heart. The strength required to control gravity takes a toll on the user. The more I push it, the more I risk breaking the laws of nature itself." Her voice was calm, but there was a dangerous edge to it, one that made you feel both intimidated and awestruck. You realized then that these women were not just warriors in a war. They were powerful forces of nature, each with a gift that could reshape the very fabric of reality. As the three of them spoke, you began to understand a bit more about the strange bond that connected them to you. They were not just following Arcus's orders. They had their own personalities, their own motivations, and their own desires. But despite the differences in their powers, they all had one thing in common. They were loyal to the legacy of Arcus, their late husband, and they felt bound by that loyalty. But the more you heard, the more it became clear that loyalty was not the same as obedience. These women were not subservient. They were powerful, and each of them had their own way of looking at the world. They might have been bound to you by the pact, but that didn't mean they would simply follow your orders without question. Lyra stepped closer, her expression softening. I can see the fear in your eyes. But you must understand, we did not choose this path. Arcus's death was not something we could control. We were forced into this, and now we are bound to you. She paused, her eyes searching yours. We will protect you, but you must prove yourself worthy of our trust. You must show us that you can lead, not just with your strength, but with your mind, your heart. You felt a strange sense of responsibility wash over you. These women, who had once been part of an empire, were now depending on you. The weight of their expectations was heavy, but somehow you knew there was no turning back. You had to rise to the occasion, not just for your own sake, but for theirs as well. I don't know if I'm ready, you admitted, your voice filled with uncertainty. This is all so overwhelming. I'm just a human. I don't have the powers you do. I don't know how to fight, how to lead, how to... Nira interrupted you, her voice firm. That's exactly why we're here. We didn't choose this, but we will teach you. We will show you how to wield your new responsibilities, how to fight, how to survive. You are not alone in this, human. Ilara stepped forward then, her expression unreadable. We may not have chosen you, but now that we are bound to you, we will follow you, if you prove yourself worthy. We will train you, teach you how to use what Arcus has left behind. But be warned, the enemy is already closing in on us, and they will stop at nothing to take us away from you. You could feel the danger growing closer with each passing second. The ships in the sky weren't just a coincidence. They were coming for you, for the wives, for the powers that now belong to you. There was no time to waste. You had to act fast, or everything you just learned would be for nothing. We don't have much time, Lyra said, her voice steady despite the chaos surrounding you. The enemies are already tracking us. The ships above are just the beginning. Soon, there will be more ships, more soldiers, and they won't stop until they have us. Naira's eyes hardened as she stepped toward you. You need to make a decision now. Are you going to lead us, or are you going to hide from what's coming? You swallowed hard, trying to push down the rising fear in your chest. For the first time in your life, you were no longer just a passive observer in the world. You were part of something much bigger. And whether you were ready or not, the fate of not just these women, but the entire galaxy, was in your hands. I'm ready, you said, your voice shaking, but determined. I don't know how to lead, but I'll learn. I won't let you down. Nara gave you a single, approving nod. Good, because the real battle is just beginning. It all started on a quiet evening, just like any other. You were sitting in your small apartment, watching the stars through your window, a bit bored and lost in thought. You were used to feeling small in the vastness of the universe, especially since space exploration was something you only saw in movies. But little did you know, that night would change everything. It was around midnight when your computer screen suddenly flickered. At first, you thought it was just a glitch, but then the screen went completely blank. Your heart raced as you moved the mouse to see if it was a problem with the connection. But instead of the usual desktop, a strange message popped up on the screen. It wasn't a regular text. No, this was different, alien, in fact. At first, you couldn't make sense of it. But then, like magic, the words translated into a language you could understand. The message read, "I am Arcus, the warlord of Salgar. If you are receiving this, then you are the chosen one. My empire is collapsing, and I am dying. As my final act, I am sending you my most prized possession. 3 powerful women, bound to me by an ancient pact, are now yours. They will serve you as they served me. Their fates are in your hands." You stared at the screen, your mind racing. It felt like a sick joke. Chosen one. You thought. You were just an ordinary human, working a 9-to-5 job. Why would an alien warlord choose you for something like this? But as strange as it seemed, you couldn't deny the feeling in your gut. This wasn't a hoax. The screen went black, and for a moment, everything was silent. But then, the room seemed to shift. You looked around, confused. The air felt heavier, almost like something was waiting for you to make the next move. Just when you thought you might be losing your mind, the doorbell rang. It was a single, sharp chime, urgent, almost demanding. You jumped up and rushed to the door, your heart pounding. But when you opened it, there was no one there. Instead, on the doorstep, you saw something you couldn't possibly explain. A small, glowing orb. It hovered just above the ground, its light pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. It wasn't like any technology you had ever seen. Tentatively, you reached down and touched it. The moment your fingers made contact, the orb dissolved into thin air, leaving behind a strange, shimmering light that seemed to swirl around you. Suddenly, before you could react, a loud whoosh echoed through the room. The sound was deafening, and you instinctively shielded your eyes. When the noise stopped and the light faded, you found yourself standing in the middle of an unfamiliar place. Gone was the apartment, replaced by a grand alien landscape. Towering structures of metal and glass stretched toward the sky, their shapes unlike anything on Earth. The air smelled different, clean, but tinged with a faint metallic taste. In front of you stood 3 women. At first glance, they looked human, but the longer you looked, the more you realized they weren't. They were stunning, each in their own way, with an otherworldly glow about them. They stared at you, their eyes intense and calculating. The first woman, Nira, had jet black hair that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Her eyes glowed with a golden hue, and she stood tall and proud, radiating strength. The second woman, Lyra, had long silver hair that cascaded down her back like liquid mercury. Her eyes were deep, almost hypnotic, and her calm demeanor gave off an aura of wisdom. But it was her presence that made your heart race. There was something about her, something that made you feel like she was inside your very thoughts. The third, Ilara, had short, platinum blonde hair, and her eyes were a striking shade of violet. She wore a look of quiet intelligence, her expression unreadable. You could tell she wasn't just beautiful. She was also calculating, always observing, always thinking. They weren't just standing there. They were waiting for you. It was as if they had been expecting you, as if their lives had led up to this moment. But why? And why you? Nira spoke first, her voice commanding yet calm. "You must be the human Arcus spoke of. We are bound to him, but now, we are bound to you." Her tone made it clear she wasn't asking, but telling. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked at you. "I sense confusion in you, human. But rest assured, we are not here to harm you. We have no choice but to follow the one who inherits the pact. And that is you." It all started on a quiet evening, just like any other. You were sitting in your small apartment, watching the stars through your window, a bit bored and lost in thought. You were used to feeling small in the vastness of the universe, especially since space exploration was something you only saw in movies. But little did you know, that night would change everything. It was around midnight when your computer screen suddenly flickered. At first, you thought it was just a glitch, but then the screen went completely blank. Your heart raced as you moved the mouse to see if it was a problem with the connection. But instead of the usual desktop, a strange message popped up on the screen. It wasn't a regular text. No, this was different. Alien, in fact. At first, you couldn't make sense of it. But then, like magic, the words translated into a language you could understand. The message read, "I am Arcus, the warlord of Salgar. If you are receiving this, then you are the chosen one. My empire is collapsing, and I am dying. As my final act, I am sending you my most prized possession. 3 powerful women, bound to me by an ancient pact, are now yours. They will serve you as they served me. Their fates are in your hands." You stared at the screen, your mind racing. It felt like a sick joke. Chosen one. You thought. You were just an ordinary human, working a 9-to-5 job. Why would an alien warlord choose you for something like this? But as strange as it seemed, you couldn't deny the feeling in your gut. This wasn't a hoax. The screen went black, and for a moment, everything was silent. But then, the room seemed to shift. You looked around, confused. The air felt heavier, almost like something was waiting for you to make the next move. Just when you thought you might be losing your mind, the doorbell rang. It was a single, sharp chime, urgent, almost demanding. You jumped up and rushed to the door, your heart pounding. But when you opened it, there was no one there. Instead, on the doorstep, you saw something you couldn't possibly explain. A small, glowing orb. It hovered just above the ground, its light pulsating with an unnatural rhythm. It wasn't like any technology you had ever seen. Tentatively, you reached down and touched it. The moment your fingers made contact, the orb dissolved into thin air, leaving behind a strange, shimmering light that seemed to swirl around you. Suddenly, before you could react, a loud whoosh echoed through the room. The sound was deafening, and you instinctively shielded your eyes. When the noise stopped and the light faded, you found yourself standing in the middle of an unfamiliar place. Gone was the apartment, replaced by a grand alien landscape. Towering structures of metal and glass stretched toward the sky, their shapes unlike anything on Earth. The air smelled different, clean, but tinged with a faint metallic taste. In front of you stood 3 women. At first glance, they looked human, but the longer you looked, the more you realized they weren't. They were stunning, each in their own way, with an otherworldly glow about them. They stared at you, their eyes intense and calculating. The first woman, Nira, had jet black hair that seemed to shimmer with starlight. Her eyes glowed with a golden hue, and she stood tall and proud, radiating strength. The second woman, Lyra, had long silver hair that cascaded down her back like liquid mercury. Her eyes were deep, almost hypnotic, and her calm demeanor gave off an aura of wisdom. But it was her presence that made your heart race. There was something about her, something that made you feel like she was inside your very thoughts. The third, Ilara, had short, platinum blonde hair, and her eyes were a striking shade of violet. She wore a look of quiet intelligence, her expression unreadable. You could tell she wasn't just beautiful. She was also calculating, always observing, always thinking. They weren't just standing there. They were waiting for you. It was as if they had been expecting you, as if their lives had led up to this moment. But why? And why you? Nira spoke first, her voice commanding yet calm. "You must be the human Arcus spoke of. We are bound to him, but now, we are bound to you." Her tone made it clear she wasn't asking, but telling. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze softening as she looked at you. "I sense confusion in you, human. But rest assured, we are not here to harm you. We have no choice but to follow the one who inherits the pact. And that is you." As they disappeared into the hallways, you faced the general and his soldiers once again. You felt the pressure building, the realization sinking in that you were in this alone now. But you weren't afraid. Not anymore. You had learned too much, trained too hard, and fought too many battles to back down now. The general took a step forward, his red eyes narrowing as he sized you up. "You're more persistent than I gave you credit for," he said, his voice mocking. "But it won't make a difference. You can fight all you want, but the rebellion is inevitable. It's already in motion. And soon, it will have control of everything. Not if I can stop it. You shot back, your hands clenched in fists. You may think you've won, but I'm not done yet. And neither is Arcus's legacy. The general's smile faded. You still don't understand, do you? Arcus was a pawn, just like you. His death was planned long before it happened. He wasn't killed by accident. He was killed because he was a threat. And now, the rebellion will make sure that no one like him ever rises again. His words were like a slap in the face. A part of you had suspected that Arcus's death wasn't an accident. But hearing the general admit it so casually was something else entirely. Arcus had been betrayed by his own people, his own trusted allies. And now, the rebellion was using his death to fuel their rise to power. Why? You demanded, stepping forward. Why did you have to kill him? What was he really planning? The general's expression shifted, his eyes darkening. Arcus had plans that threatened the stability of the galaxy. He was going to unite all the factions, force them to bend to his will. And in doing so, he was going to strip the power from those who had always controlled the galaxy. The rebellion couldn't let that happen. So we took matters into our own hands. But he was trying to create peace, you said, your voice rising. He wanted to stop the constant fighting, the endless wars between factions. He wanted to unite the galaxy under one banner, to bring peace to everyone. Peace, the general spat. Peace is a lie. You think that Arcus could have united the galaxy. He was too powerful, too dangerous. He didn't care about peace. He cared about domination. And that is why we had to stop him. It wasn't just about control. It was about survival. The words hung in the air between you, heavy with the weight of what they meant. The rebellion wasn't just some group of anarchists. It was a faction that truly believed it was saving the galaxy from a greater threat. But in doing so, they had killed the very person who had the potential to change the galaxy for the better. Suddenly, the ground shook again. The walls trembled as if something massive was moving through the ship. The rebellion's forces were getting closer, and the general's soldiers weren't wasting any more time. It was clear they were about to launch their final attack. You still don't get it, the general said, his voice low. You can fight all you want, but the galaxy belongs to those who have the power to take it. And right now, that power belongs to the rebellion. You didn't answer. Instead, you focused on the truth that had just been revealed. Arcus hadn't just died at the hands of an enemy. He had been betrayed by those closest to him, by the very people who should have been his allies. The rebellion's reach wasn't just a simple fight against an empire. It was a war to control the future of the galaxy. And you were stuck in the middle of it, caught between two sides that seemed equally dangerous. But there was one thing you knew for sure. You weren't going to let the rebellion control the truth. You weren't going to let them erase everything Arcus had stood for. And you weren't going to stop fighting until you uncovered the full extent of the conspiracy. The entire ship trembled beneath your feet as the rebellion's forces pushed forward, tightening their grip on the ship. It felt like every passing second was another step toward an inevitable end. You had uncovered the truth about Arcus's death. But what now? What could you do against an enemy that was so powerful and organized, with the truth of Arcus's death now hanging over you like a dark cloud? Nera, Lyra, and Ilara had managed to escape, but now they were racing against time. The rebellion's forces were everywhere, closing in on your position, and you weren't about to let them succeed. Not while you still had breath in your lungs. I won't run, you muttered under your breath as you tightened your grip on your weapon. The time for hiding was over. It was time for the final stand. We finished this, together. The wives each took their place beside you, their powers evident in the way they carried themselves. You might not have been ready, but together you could face whatever challenges lay ahead. You had no choice. The days after the arrival of the three wives were filled with chaos. You had barely gotten used to the idea that your life had been turned upside down when the threat hanging over you grew stronger. The ships above, which had first seemed like a passing danger, were just the beginning. The reality of your situation hit hard. This wasn't just about surviving. It was about discovering who was behind Arcus's death, and why. And why now, of all times, had you been chosen to inherit such a dangerous legacy? The three women, Nira, Lyra, and Ilara, had begun training you in ways you could never have imagined. Each one brought something different to the table, and despite the tense, often uncomfortable atmosphere, they seemed determined to help you. Nira's training focused on strategy and combat. She was a warrior at heart, and her teaching methods were intense. Survival, she said, isn't just about strength. It's about thinking 3 steps ahead. The enemy will not wait for you to get ready. You must always be prepared. Lyra's training, on the other hand, was all about control and balance. Your mind must be as strong as your body, she explained. The power we hold isn't just physical, it's mental. If you lose control of your thoughts, you will lose control of everything else. Her ability to heal was remarkable, but it wasn't without consequences. Every time she healed you after one of Nira's tough training sessions, you could see the toll it took on her. She would collapse afterward, her eyes tired and her energy drained. You wanted to help her, but there was nothing you could do. Ilara was the quiet one, but her power was the most intense. She could manipulate gravity, but not in a simple way. She could make entire landscapes shift, objects float, and even change the weight of things around her. Understanding gravity is understanding the world around you, she said one day, showing you how to move rocks with a thought. You must know when to push and when to pull. If you pull too hard, you risk breaking things. If you push too much, you risk losing control. The training was grueling, but it wasn't the hardest part. What really kept you up at night were the questions that kept swirling in your head. Why had Arcus chosen you? What had really happened to him? And why were these women now bound to you, seemingly for no reason other than his death? One evening, after a long day of training, you were sitting in a quiet room with the wives, trying to relax and wrap your head around everything. The atmosphere was tense, as it always was when you were alone together. They were your protectors now, but they were also strangers to you, aliens from a world you could barely understand. Lyra was the first to speak up, her voice soft, as though she were testing the waters. "You're wondering why Arcus left this to you, aren't you?" she asked. You didn't even have to answer. She could feel your unease, your confusion. "It's not a simple decision," she continued. "When Arcus chose you, it wasn't just because he saw potential in you. It was because he knew what was coming, and he knew you would have to face it." "What do you mean?" you asked, sitting up straighter. "What's coming? And why me?" Ilara, who had been silent up until now, spoke for the first time in hours. Her voice was low, but there was an edge to it. "It's a conspiracy. Arcus's death wasn't an accident. It was planned. He wasn't just killed by the rebellion or the enemy. He was betrayed by his own people." You froze. Betrayed? That didn't make sense. Arcus had been one of the most powerful warlords in the galaxy. How could he be betrayed by his own? "You're saying someone inside his own empire killed him?" you asked. Nira, who had been quiet all this time, nodded. "Yes, the rebellion that took down Arcus wasn't the real threat. The real threat is the people closest to him, his trusted generals, his advisors, the ones who were supposed to protect him." "But why?" you asked, trying to understand. "Why would they do this?" Lyra looked at you with a sad expression. It wasn't just about power. It was about control. Arcus had become too powerful. He had ambitions that many of his followers didn't agree with. He was planning to expand his empire, to unite the galaxy under his rule. But there were those who believed that his vision was too dangerous. Some wanted power for themselves, Nira added, and some wanted to destroy everything Arcus built. They knew that if they got rid of him, they could take over and control the legacy he left behind. And they needed us, his wives, to solidify their hold. One smiled, having heard this question many times before. Because sometimes the simplest solution is the most reliable. Your technology is impressive, but it can fail. These skills, they've kept humans alive for thousands of years. In the main diplomatic building, representatives from Earth and the Confederation were discussing the next phase of their relationship. The agreement was clear. Earth would not be overwhelmed with advanced technology. Instead, both civilizations would learn from each other, growing together in understanding. Neri had been instrumental in designing this approach. Her experience had shown her the value of balanced progress, advancing while maintaining connection to fundamental knowledge and skills. The galaxy is changing, Jin-Ho observed, watching as human survival experts taught Confederation scientists about Earth's various ecosystems. Other civilizations are beginning to see what we learned here. Indeed, the impact of Neri's crash landing had rippled throughout known space. The Confederation's new approach to emerging civilizations emphasized learning rather than judgment, exchange rather than superiority. Do-One's class ended as the sun began to set. As his students dispersed, some to the diplomatic compound, others to their own wilderness training camps, he joined Neri and Jin-Ho on the deck. "They're learning quickly," he said, accepting a cup of tea from Neri. "Both humans and aliens. It's amazing how knowledge breaks down barriers." Neri nodded, remembering her own journey from crash survivor to student of Earth's wisdom. "We thought we were coming to study a primitive world," she said. "Instead, we found teachers." The three of them watched the sunset paint the Alaskan wilderness in brilliant colors. Below them, humans and aliens worked together, sharing knowledge that bridged the gap between high technology and fundamental wisdom. "This is true advancement," Jin-Ho said, gesturing to the scene before them. "Not just creating new tools, but understanding when to use them, and when not to." As darkness fell, lights came on in the diplomatic compound, a blend of Confederation technology and Earth-based solar power. The building itself was a testament to their new philosophy, incorporating both advanced materials and traditional building techniques that had served humans well for centuries. Do-One smiled as he saw new students arriving for the night training session. "The best tools," he said, repeating what had become something of a motto for the exchange program, "are the ones you understand completely, whether they're made of starship alloy or simple wood." Neri touched the wooden cane at her side, a constant reminder of how a seemingly primitive tool had helped her survive when all her advanced technology had failed. That simple piece of carved wood had become a symbol of the new understanding between their peoples, a bridge between the stars and the earth, between technology and wisdom, between progress and tradition. As night fell over the Alaskan wilderness, the lights of the compound blended with the stars above, a perfect symbol of two civilizations learning to grow together, each discovering that true advancement came not from abandoning the old ways for the new, but from finding the wisdom to use both in harmony.